Hey Greg, thanks for your work here in week five. Just thought I'd send you a quick video reply engaging what you've written here in Forum 1 and Forum 2 about parables, especially this generation. Some good stuff in both of your responses. You also ask a good question about the emphasis of Carter on the imperial causes of the diseases that Jesus is healing, and therefore the effects of Jesus's healing on the imperial domination of people in the land. Where does this leave so much material in the narrative that is focused on the corruption of uh, Israel's own authorities in the land? Some of the scribes, Pharisees, later, of course, Sadducees, chief priests, others. So let me see if I can give you a little bit of my take on some of these things. Um, let's start, first of all, with Case Winter's claim that, you know, Matthew's parables sort of speak to the particular problem of people not understanding Jesus's identity or not believing Jesus's identity. I have to say, I'm just generally unfriendly to that diagnosis of what anything in Matthew is about. Because as much as Christians would like for this narrative, its drama, to be about whether people believe the right thing about Jesus, those are never the terms in which people's uh, interactions with Jesus really are described. So when they reject Jesus, for example, in Matthew 11 this week, if that's what it is, it's a rejection of Jesus's call to repent. And it wasn't just him, it was his apostles, whose message was repent, because the kingdom of heaven has come upon you. So it's not really a message about who Jesus is that people would be accepting or rejecting. There might be something implicit about Jesus as a prophet, as someone who has authority that is from God. Obviously, we're coming up on this scene where Jesus asks his disciples who people are saying that he is. But the point is, I don't think we can understand the parables or the shift to parables in terms of Jesus's identity per se. It just seems to me like that's not really tracking with the specific way the drama of the narrative is presented. So that is what you were writing about in Forum 1 a little bit. You talk about this generation as well. I think I really resonate with what you're saying is the need to treat the authorities as really prominent in Jesus's concept or term of this generation, and not to overly generalize who is implicated in this. I think that that is right. My caveat there, though, is that I do think Jesus is warning people that they will not be able to avoid the consequences of bad government as well. So, as much as he is denouncing authorities, he is also talking to the crowds who are under the influence of those authorities about what is coming their way insofar as they go the way of these authorities. And this is, of course, what we see historically in proverbial generations of Israel's past. The wilderness generation, uh, it's not just the authorities that suffer, even if the authorities perhaps bear especially extreme consequences, all of the people are affected. And I think that that is true in Matthew's gospel as well, um, that the the sort of injustice, poor shepherding that is done by authorities ends up affecting everybody. And here's the key about this. It finally affects Jesus and Jesus's disciples. So when we come to the end of the narrative, it turns out that the very judgment that Jesus is warning his generation as coming to them is judgment that he faces and endures himself. And so the issue then, sort of as we saw at the end of his opening discourse, the Sermon on the Mount, is not whether people will face the storm of judgment that is coming to their generation. They will all face it and have to endure it. It's a question of how they will endure. What will be left of their lives and their memory on the far side of that coming storm? So that's maybe how I'd nuance the sense of this generation and who it implicates, et cetera. Now, the thing about Carter, this is you're pointing to something that is one of my, I don't know, this might be a little strong, my primary sort of biffs with Carter. Because, generally I'm really sympathetic with the need to um, sort of make clearer the political dynamics at play in the narrative, and specifically the presence of the empire and how Jesus is addressing it. But it does seem to me like Carter can play that to such an extent that you lose sight of other actors that, yes, they might be conduits of imperial power, but they're also distinct. The chief priests and the elders of the people in Jerusalem are clearly puppets in one way of Roman power. But they're not a direct sort of administrator of the Roman government the way that Pilate is. Similarly, scribes and Pharisees in the Galilee that are teaching in the synagogues and kind of the pastors and local authorities of people's lives, they're not directly agents of Rome. Now, they might be falling prey to some of Rome's kind of seductions in the way that they rule, but in many ways, they're also trying to protect their people from the destructive effects of Roman hegemony. This is partly why they are so obsessive about certain distinctives of the law and how to abide by it. So I just think that we need a little bit more of a complex picture of how Jesus's deeds of power, his teaching, etc., engage the power structures of his people's lives, and to sort of recognize how the empire is obviously an enormous factor, but is not the all-explaining factor. And there's a variety of sort of collusions that are going on between Roman imperial power, between local Jewish authorities, between Jerusalem government, and then the role of the devil and demonic forces in all of this. That has to all somehow fit. And if we're just talking about the Roman power, Roman Empire, then I fear that we will underestimate the way that empires and, global geopolitical powers are always mediated by all kinds of local forces, and they're not always official sort of representatives of the empire. Um, and so that does seem important to me, and I'm glad you're sort of calling attention to it. We can talk about this more in future conversations, but I do think that this is something that we've got to integrate into our picture of what Jesus is up to. And maybe one of the reasons it's significant too is it's really popular today, right, to be anti the American empire or whatever, geopolitical global white nationalism. We have a lot of like big powers that we are up against and that deserve to be named as things we want to oppose. And yet, that can sometimes allow us to overly externalize those powers and oversimplify them and not be able to describe very well how they are colluding with all kinds of more regional and local structures of power and colluding with tendencies in ourselves, habits that we have, ways of being that we embody. And sometimes I think conveniently we sort of outsource all of the responsibility, um, which again, we've got to name big powers for what they are, but we can underplay the power that God has called us to embody as we engage this maybe more complex matrix of power in which our lives are unfolding. Anyway, Greg, hope that helps a little bit. Thanks for some great responses here in week 5, and look forward to more conversation in the weeks ahead.